Everybody complains about a lack of accountability, but how do you do that without micromanaging people? Because people like accountability, but they don't like to be held accountable. Well, we're going to help you build a culture of accountability in your business with some actionable steps if you stick around to the end.
Welcome back to Blunt Force Business. I'm Brian LaFauci.
And I'm Patrick Marino.
And today we're going to talk about accountable. You're going to be accountable for today's outcome, that's for sure.
I don't like to be held accountable by anybody. No one's holding this accountable.
You will be accountable. And as we get into the video, we're going to jump into some key strategies you can use to increase accountability right now in your business. So let's jump right into our Blunt Force facts we're going to talk about today. So Blunt Force fact number 1, Patrick, is accountability isn't punishment.
Yeah, so I think that one of the challenges that an organization can have is just people don't really know where they stand. And if you look at accountability as a punishment, then you're not understanding the true value, which is basically letting people know where they stand so they can do what they got to do. If you never give them that accountability, then they can be pretty aimless. So you can see where that could cause problems.
Absolutely. Blunt Force fact number 2 we're going to talk to you about today is no clarity, no direction.
Yeah, so it's kind of similar to what I just said with the first one, but I think that it's difficult. We've all been in that situation where it's like, okay, well, why didn't this get done this way? Well, you didn't tell me to do it that way, right? So it's important if you're going to develop a positive culture of accountability that you set these clear expectations so that people understand exactly what they're supposed to do.
And then Blunt Force fact number 3 is that communication is the glue to accountability.
Yeah. So if you're just letting people fly by the seat of their pants and you're not checking in with people and you're not, again, telling them setting the clear expectations, you can't do any of that without communication, obviously, and it needs to be back and forth.
I think when we, as we delve in and we start to think about how this implements in most businesses, I think a lot of times people think about accountability and they always think punitive, right? Because you think you need to hold people accountable. And what does that mean? That means telling them you need to tell everybody when they fuck up.
Yeah, nobody likes to be everybody needs to be managed, but nobody likes to be managed.
But done correctly, accountability isn't always about punitive measures. It's not always about just telling people when they miss the mark. What accountability is holding firm to the mark. And accountability is saying these are the deadlines, these are the left and right parameters. And if we don't maintain those left and right parameters, we're going to get lost. And we talk about this a lot with setting operations in your business. And it can feel like the operations are the baselines of accountability. So if you haven't set the operations down in paper, and in paper is important because when you call someone under the carpet for accountability, when that moment does happen, I hate doing it when the subjective nature is a conversation we had.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's just because the ability to say, well, I didn't quite understand that, is just too easy.
Right.
And most people don't like to take accountability in the net. They like to be accountable when it was successful.
Right.
Everybody wants to grab the accountability for success. Yep. Right. And they go internal with that. Like the success happened because of me. The minute the failure happens, we're going to go extrinsic, right? And we're going to be, well, it was Joey, or it was not clearly understanding. And so it's our job, I think, to create that, because it does, if we look at it as creating the opportunities for success, it's a much better way to approach this, and it's the reality.
Right. Yeah, and I think that it's important for especially the small business and the small business owner to understand that accountability all the way up the food chain starts with the owner.
Right.
Right? The person who's in charge.
Right.
Ultimately, I am accountable for what happens in this business because it's my business. I'm the one who's most invested in it. I'm the one who's, especially if I started the business, right? I'm the one who's, if this doesn't go well, I'm not going to be able to feed my family, right? And I might have some really important problems. And if you start I think that's important for the owner of the company to have that perspective, because there's some that don't, or at least
Right.
don't outwardly
Right.
have that perspective. And that's when the employees or the people that are working in the company feel leaderless, right? It's ultimately about leadership, right? And I don't know if you've ever worked in an environment like this, but if you ever, I mean, I'll ask you, have you ever worked in an environment where you have felt like you didn't quite have an objective, right? Where it's like you are just kind of showing up every day.
Oh, yeah.
And you're not quite sure what to do, right? And it's like there's to a certain, so there's, I think there's, in some ways, for certain personalities, that can be cool because it's like, I'm getting paid just to show up. But those days can be long days if you're an employee, right? If you're showing up and you're not sure what you're supposed to do. And even though it's like, I'm collecting a paycheck and this is easy, I'm getting no fulfillment. I'm getting bored, and meanwhile, it's not productive for me, especially like if you look at statistics about like what younger people, new employees are looking for. They're looking for that fulfillment in their job, and you can't have fulfillment if you're aimless, if you're just showing up, if you're
Right.
just punching the clock. If I'm getting paid just to be there, that's usually a problem, right? And then the opposite is also true. It's like you don't want to have the person who's on top of you all the time. Like that's probably like if you ask somebody in an interview, like, what don't you want? I feel like I don't want to be micromanaged is probably like one of the things that comes up, especially for like a more experienced person, right? So you don't want the micromanagement, but you need to be managed.
Yeah.
You need to have that accountability to feel good about what you're doing. And the accountability there again, like, no, it's like you said, I didn't say it was punitive, right? It wasn't say it was a punishment. You need to know where you stand. Did we do the job? Did we do it correctly? And then the only way that we can improve and move forward is if we know, and that's where the accountability comes in.
And I think where we sometimes go wrong as owners is we create accountability for the people that are going to work for us before we create accountability for ourselves for the deliverable for their success, right? So the hierarchy is this. It's real. If you have stuff set up for your employees where you can be like, yeah, my employee knows the left and right limit of A, B, and C, and I have, that's great. But did you first create the left and right limit for you to ensure that they're set up to succeed with that? So you can't give them the deliverables without first putting in place how you're going to train them to just be successful in those deliverables. And I think that gets missed a lot.
Well, we've talked about it in the past a lot. You've got one of our blunt force facts is success is design, right? It doesn't happen by accident. Success happens because we created an environment where success is possible.
Right.
Right. And with as you use the left and right parameters as the way of saying that. But that's a big factor in determining whether something worked or whether it didn't work is were the ingredients there, were the right ingredients there for it to work.
Yep.
And then that we've been using the word as we've been kind of thinking it through. We've been using the word empowerment, like having the backing and the steps and the processes empowers me to do it correctly. And then without those things, it's very difficult for you to hold me accountable for doing something if I don't know how to do it. It's like, well, why didn't this get done? Or why didn't this get done correctly? Well, I've never done that before. You know what I mean? Like you've given me something brand new. I have no training, didn't know how to do it. And no, I failed.
And that goes to the clarity piece of it, right? That goes to the piece of providing the right clarity for us. So we're clear on what we need to train people on, and then providing the clarity for the people so they know that the direction they want to go in. And then we can get to, all right, now it's an operating thing. And now I think the biggest piece of this discussion is the last blunt force fact is how do you maintain this now? Because the first ones are really like operational things. We do A, we do B, and now we have the general guidelines for this thing. What we as the owner know we need to provide to ensure success, what the employee knows they need to deliver to ensure success, and then everything else is all about communication. So the first two are me, and then the last one. the last big one. Communication is the glue that holds it all together. It's the biggest piece. So how do you, if you don't have systems implemented to ensure consistent and open communication around things that are going on, then it falls apart.
That's where the micromanagement piece comes into. I think there's a lot of managers, small business owners in particular, who lack experience in this, or there's a very traditional type of small business owner who started the business because they knew how to do something, but don't have any skills on managing people or communicating how to do things. Right? It's like Michael. We've talked about this. Like there's the athletes who don't know how to explain how to do something because they're just so good at it.
How to
right?
coach, yeah.
It's
What do you mean you can't do it?
I'm wicked good at this sport, and I'm trying to get you to be as good at the sport, and I can't do it.
What do you mean you can't dunk from the foul line?
So I think I think that that's a big issue for small business owners who started the business based on a skill that they have. And the trend is usually both. It's usually the micromanaging or in this case, the one that you just addressed, which is the lack of communication.
Right.
Which is like, I'm afraid and afraid is probably not conscious, it's probably subconscious. Like I'm afraid to try and hold people accountable for this because I know in my head that like I don't necessarily know what I'm doing in terms of the management piece. And so I'm going to try and hire people who I think are competent. But even then, even if you hire people who are competent, they still need to be managed.
Yeah.
They need to be held accountable. In fact, the more competent they are, the more they're going to require accountability. Right? They're going to need that management. They're going to need to be told when they did something wrong so that they can improve. They're going to want to know that. But if you just leave people to their own devices, they might enjoy that to a certain extent. But I think they're going to be unfulfilled, and your organization is going to be not as successful,
right,
as it can be. The other piece, which I think is hard as well, because I think that like it's easy. This is way easier when you're just starting. Usually, a lack of accountability has happened over time.
Right? Yeah, you
like
find yourself. I know there's times I've found myself in a space where I'm looking at the people that are doing stuff with me, and I'm like, you know what? We went down this road because I didn't say something to them 2 months ago.
Yeah.
And if I had just said something to them 2 months ago, I wouldn't be here now.
Yep. Yeah,
absolutely.
And you have to do that when you're managing in both directions, managing up and managing down. Because from an employee or from a contractor perspective, if you're working with somebody that you've contracted with, you need to do that as well. You need to hold them accountable as well. But I think that going back to what I was going to get at was, if you have a team, a group of people, so there's more than one person, it's really important that you identify not just the what, but also the who. Right? Who's accountable? Because if neither person thinks that they're in charge of a process, or going to be held accountable or are responsible for something, then like that's the easiest way for something not to get done or not get done correctly.
That's a great point. And a lot of times, and now let's take this down to a small business setting. Let's take this down to, we have like a solopreneur who is hiring their first person or second person, okay? And so there's a lot of interaction because the organization isn't too big. So there's a lot of high touch interaction between the owner and the 1 or 2 employees. So you feel like we're communicating all the time. And a lot of times in those cases, the individuals together will be working together on stuff, right? So you're going to help me, the common thing, you're going to help me with this. Okay, great. What the fuck does that mean, right? Where are the left and right limits of that? And what am I accountable for, right? If it fails, is it my fault? Or is it your fault? Or is it our fault? Or is it, right? Like, so that's where the laying out of the parameters is really, really important. Like, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to get you this and do that and do this. You're going to A, B, and C. And then we'll meet back up and talk through it and see how my part's going, how your part's going.
Yeah, it's important that for every process, you identify the people responsible and accountable. Right. And the bigger the business is, the more that can get complicated. Mm-hmm. Even the small business can be kind of big in terms of like the number of people who work for it.
Yeah.
One of the CEOs who I've referenced in the past that I've contracted with kind of recently, he used to have this chart called the RACI chart. And basically the idea was that for every process or task, you need to have these 4 components, right? The person who's responsible for actually doing the work. But then the A, and it can only be one. can only be one person who has the A. Who's got the A on this task?
Accountability.
Yeah, exactly. Who's got the A? Because now there's no confusion. If you don't identify the A, the more people that are involved, the more complicated it gets.
What are the other letters? That was
I was thinking about that. I was going to say it. So
you
I know that the R is responsible. So that's generally speaking the person who's like doing the actual work.
Yep.
The A could maybe be involved in the process too, but the A is the one who's ultimately going to be
on the hook
answering
for
to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that, so again, like the A might be the person who's like on top of the person who's the R, managing that person, make sure he's got everything he's got. I'm the one who has to go back to the CEO and tell you, like, here's how it went, here's what we did, or whatever it is. I think the C is consulted and the I is informed, but those
that makes sense.
Those sound the same. But basically, farther up the chart, there might be like, hey, like maybe it's not the CEO, but maybe there's somebody else, like the director of finance needs to be kept in the loop on this,
right?
Or another party has to be kept on the loop, because not for every process and every task, especially as you get further down to the micro level of what the tasks looks like, then there might not be as many people who need to know about it. We talked about this when we talked about RevOps, like the idea that we have to have all these people functioning, right? So not everybody in the marketing department needs to know what's going on at the sales department, or everybody in the sales department doesn't all need to know what's going on in the customer service department, but somebody from each level needs to know.
Right.
So they're informed, right? So it's like, we're doing the nitty gritty here. I'm accountable for it. And as we keep going, I need to make sure I let Sue know in customer service what we just did. I need to know from a marketing perspective, I need to know the director of sales or whoever it is knows what we just decided. So there's, but by identifying it, now you've got that, you've created this organizational structure. But it's really, you're running into trouble if you have no A or if you have too many A's.
Yeah.
Right. If you have too many people accountable for it, then like they're going to be running into each other. You know what I mean? They're going to be maybe overlapping in tasks. You really want to have one person who's like, here, your job is to make sure that this gets done.
Yeah. That's a great
and then
tool.
it's there, and then they can figure out how to do it. But that way there's no confusion. I think that's a lot of failures. People start pointing the fingers. Like, who is supposed to do this? Have an A. You got to have an A.
Love it. So the big overlying piece of this is communication. And I think, we promised our listeners we'd give some solutions to this and things they could implement right now. And I think a lot of those solutions are geared in the space of communication.
Yeah.
And the first thing is, we talked a lot about this. So the first thing that you need to start with is you got to start with like outlining the clear expectation. And I probably don't need to say this because we say it all the time, but that's got to be in writing. Okay.
Yeah.
I
thought you were going to say, I shouldn't say SMART goals.
I won't say SMART
we
goals.
Hate our,
we hate SMART
acronyms.
goals.
Every time we try and define SMART goals, we get it wrong. It's like, I just got racy wrong.
Stupid, measurable. And that's what the SMART goals are, right? Attainable.
Yeah.
Regrettable.
Those are some of the smartest goals.
The smartest goals, the regrettable goals. So set the clear expectations, get them in writing so that everyone can look at them and say, okay, this is what we're going to do for this project. Okay. And then everything else is communication based and needs to be scheduled communication. So how do you do that? So you schedule regular check-ins on this. And we're going to go back to one of our other blunt force facts that we say all the time, and that is leadership.
Have good meetings?
Have good meetings. Leadership is what? Listening. Patrick, you must watch our videos. And listening is leadership. So this is not the schedule meeting so I can hear myself fucking talk. Okay, that there's plenty of time to talk. This is schedule meetings so you can listen and get feedback and hear and blot time out for that. Like set time out to say, all right, ask the leading questions or the unleading questions that allow just for you to sit back, listen, and take notes. And like you're doing right now.
And make sure that the people that, if something didn't work or something did work, you're evaluating and making sure that the tools are in place for the thing to work better the next time, or that the tools are in place for the thing to continue to work well. And you start to identify, but you can only do that through listening to your people, talking to them, asking how it went. I think these are part of the accountability process.
They are.
Right.
And a great way to ask that question is simply to ask it.
Yeah.
A great part of the feedback session is to ask the question, what more do you need from me? And listen, you may not be able to provide it all because sometimes that list isn't unattainable. I get it. But what more do you need from me? And get that kind of laid out.
And then obviously that's where you get to the point where maybe you cut somebody loose. Because why did the thing not get done? Was it because there was a problem with the process or because there was a problem with the person who was in charge of the process?
Right.
But you can't, unless you're holding people sufficiently accountable at the right levels, then really the accountable person for the process failing is you, the owner. So that's why this feedback and this constant checking in on it and making sure that we're evaluating things properly is super important.
And one other recommendation is, if you can make it work this way, setting a time for a listening check-in and setting a separate time to provide feedback is very beneficial, because what it will provide you, it'll provide you with that necessary time to process. Because if our session is combined with, hey, let's have some open discussion, safe space, right? We talk about that, like provide a safe space.
Love our safe spaces over in Blunt Forest Business.
Love our safe
space. The dad den.
You're in the blunt zone or
You're
the dad den?
Blunt zone.
So if you're in the blunt zone and you're having this safe space discussion, and then immediately I transition to, well, now I'm going to call you to the carpet for this thing. They're going to catch on to that, and that meeting is not. They're going to come to that meeting anxious, like, oh, well, now this one's going to end. So, suggestion is break it into two separate meetings, right? So a meaningful meeting of, let's get some constructive feedback. Say whatever you want. Safe space. Blah blah blah. All right, great. Now I'm going to go process that, look at the results, and then the next time we meet, it's going to be maybe a little less leadership-based in a listening standpoint, and now leadership in us being accountable to the fact we need to, one, find any gaps where we weren't providing them what they need and deliver on it, and then two, finding the gaps where they're not delivering on what they should be accountable for and correct that. So that conversation has a different feel to it. But we were reflective. So we had a period of reflection to get from A to B. Because, if we have an open conversation about a thing and you say a trigger for me, and I immediately go to like, that he didn't do, I did, and right, and my mind goes there, it's going to be really tough for me to like hear the rest of what you're saying.
You have to, like, I used to have some conversations with people in organizations I've contracted in the past. And I think that one of the things that happens, especially with a small business where the person who started it is excellent at something.
Yep.
There can become like this cult of personality, right? And people don't want to disappoint the person who they're working for. And so they just hold it to themselves.
Yep.
And they can hold it to themselves because they're afraid, because they don't want to lose their job. But they could also hold it because they just assume that person knows what they're doing, right? And so it's like, oh, he must know, right? He's the freaking rock star, right? So I'm not going to share my stupid opinion, right? But that's just like a recipe for disaster.
Right.
Because I'm working in the trenches.
Yeah.
He's off doing his thing. Maybe he's responsible for some other part of the company, especially if he's in charge of the company, right? So he's got these other things on his mind. So he doesn't know what I'm seeing and I'm hearing. And I need to be comfortable enough to present this to that person. And that person has to be open enough to allow me to do it.
Yeah.
And has to make sure they say explicitly, like, you are allowed to say what's on your mind.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we're not going to solve this problem. This process is never going to get solved because I haven't shared openly and honestly what I actually think.
Right.
And you haven't given me the power to do so.
Right.
And that's where true accountability can only come once we have that relationship.
Yeah.
We're honest with each other and it's open and there's this safe space. We're in the blunt zone.
Yeah.
Are we in the blunt
But
zone?
you gotta lay it out.
We're in the blunt zone.
You got to lay it out.
We're in
And
the dad then. It's okay. What you say is fine.
and they need to understand that. It needs to be laid out, and they need to understand that this is the time for this, and this is what we're doing.
Yeah.
So say what you want, and we'll take it away, and then we'll come back with some solutions, right? I think that's great. So all communication based. And the last piece of it, to bring up as we're getting close to the end here is recognizing achievements and really focusing on, all right, accountability isn't all about corrective. Accountability is being more focused on you hit it out of the park. You checked all those boxes, and that means a lot to me. And it means a lot to the company, and we're going to recognize that. And here's $1.
Yeah,
Maybe
very
two.
important because then people feel better about it themselves. But also, it's
Shannon didn't like the $1. She's like, $2.
It's like this is what I get for staying for overtime and
Overtime.
for walking the dog. Yeah, for walking the dog.
Overtime, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, like we've talked about celebrating the small wins and how that builds. It's the small wins that lead to the bigger win because the small wins hardwires. Winning hardwires, right? If I have success, I'm more likely, and I'm recognized for that success, I'm more likely to repeat
Absolutely.
that behavior.
Absolutely.
Right? So
Yes.
and that's right or wrong. If I got it right, but the process was wrong, I'm still going to want to do the same way
Yeah.
because I'm going to want that same feeling.
Yeah.
So it's important that when we get it right in all the right ways, that we celebrate that because now we're going to repeat. We're going to be more likely to repeat that.
Yeah.
And the more of the right ways we got it, the more we have to get after it.
Yep.
And then the more of those big wins that we have, or not big wins, but the more wins we have total, we can then get to the stuff that we didn't do
Absolutely.
well and more effectively manage that because people don't feel like they're being micromanaged. They don't feel like they're being constantly knocked over the head with the stuff they're doing poorly, right? Because people don't want to be held accountable for everything all the time.
Right. Yeah. Accountability isn't punishment. It's about recognizing wins as well. Good stuff. Very good. Anything else before we wrap?
Well, I think the most important thing for any leader, but especially a small business leader, because by definition it's smaller, is you need to lead by example, right? You have to admit when you've been the one. You have to jump on your sword, right? You have to be like, look, I fucked this up.
Yep.
It was my responsibility to do this, or I didn't give you the tools. I expected you to do this, but I gave you no training. We as an organization didn't know how to do it, but I just said, do it, right?
Right.
And we didn't have enough time to figure it out.
Yeah.
We didn't have the tools to do it. We didn't know how much it was going to cost, whatever it is. Just admit to your own failure. And as you do that, as you're going through that process, say, okay, so I fucked this up. Now I'm going to fix it, and here's how.
Yeah.
Right. And now what you've done is you've held yourself accountable, and everybody in the room knows that, oh, he's going to hold himself accountable for that
That's it.
too. Then I'm going to work harder to make sure we do that. And this is, I don't know if this is a great way to do it, but like one of the things we do in coaching is you find the all-star and you hold that person accountable. You have to have a good relationship with that person to do
Right.
this. So everybody in the room knows, well, if freaking the all-star is being held accountable, then like I am nowhere near as good as the all-star.
Right.
This was like a big thing in like the Patriots culture.
Yeah.
The person who was held the most accountable was Brady.
Right.
He was the best player.
Yeah.
Right. And it was like that was that example of, well, if that guy can screw up.
Yeah.
And
he held
freaking-
himself accountable.
Exactly. And he was the right person.
Right.
He was the right person
Absolutely.
to be the accountability champion, right? The person who was being held the most accountable.
Yep.
And that's a next level management thing where you have to have a good grasp of who your people are.
Yep.
And know that personality can handle that in
Yeah.
that room and take that accountability.
Yeah.
But that's another way of creating the culture by saying, okay, everybody's accountable. I'm accountable.
Yep.
This guy is the freaking sales leader. I'm holding him accountable too. He screws up some. He lost that deal. He could have done better there.
Yep.
Like it's all of us. It's not just you who's the grunt
Yeah.
who needs to be held accountable because you're fucking up all the time.
The best coaches can find the flaws in the best player on their team and be able to be not always high-fiving them. So,
People who are high achievers generally want this accountability.
yep.
So you've got to, it's your job as the owner
Yeah.
to create the culture where that can be
Yeah.
culture wide, company wide.
Good stuff. All right. Blunt force facts, holding your people accountable. Blunt force fact number 1, accountability isn't punishment. Blunt force fact number 2, no clarity, no direction. Not one clarity, one direction. It's a different blunt force fact for another day. That was bad, huh? We're in the blood zone. And blunt force fact number 3, communication is the glue of accountability. I'm Brian LaFauci.
Patrick Marino.
Until next time.
Thank you.